The Alpha King claimed her, but you won't believe what happened when her face was revealed. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. Alice had always been overlooked. As an Omega, she was born weak, unable to shift into her wolf form like the others in her pack. For years, she had been the subject of ridicule, her very existence seen as a burden. Her pack, full of powerful alphas and betas, viewed her as nothing more than a mistake, a weakness in their bloodline. No one had ever given her the time of day, not in the way a mate should. Her heart had been broken countless times, as every attempt at love or acceptance had been met with rejection. But today it was different. Today, she was to be chosen, or so they thought. The pack was hosting a grand ceremony for all unmated wolves, where the Alpha King himself, Kaelen, would choose his bride. All the strongest Omegas, Betas, and even some Alphas had gathered, preparing to be chosen as his mate, each one hoping for a chance to rise in status. But not Alice. She didn't even bother to hope. She had learned long ago that people like her never got picked. As the ceremony began, she stood at the back of the group, blending into the shadows, trying to keep her presence as small as possible. She felt the weight of the eyes on her, the judgment, the pity, but none of it mattered. The pack would never accept her, and neither would the king. They would choose someone else, someone stronger, someone more beautiful. It wasn't long before the Alpha King entered, his presence commanding attention, his powerful aura immediately filling the room. He was tall, with dark, piercing eyes that seemed to see right through her. He was a legend, the king who had conquered all, whose very name made people tremble in awe. His reputation for ruthlessness was known far and wide, and every Omega in the room longed for his attention. Kaelen walked slowly, his gaze sweeping over the crowd, and then, without warning, his eyes landed on Alice. She froze. For the first time, she felt his gaze not as a burden, but as something more. He stared at her for what seemed like an eternity, and in that moment, something inside her shifted. He had stopped. Everyone was watching. Her heart hammered in her chest, and she could barely breathe as she met his eyes. And then, to her shock, the Alpha King spoke. She is the one. The room fell silent. Whispers spread like wildfire. Had the Alpha King really chosen her? She, the Omega everyone had rejected? The same Omega they had all laughed at, the one they believed had no place in their world? The murmurs grew louder, but Kaelen remained steady, his gaze never leaving hers. He stepped forward and extended his hand to her. Come with me, Alice. You are mine. She blinked, her mind racing. How could this be happening? She was just an Omega, an outcast. Yet here was the most powerful man in the land, declaring her his mate. She stepped forward, her legs trembling beneath her. This couldn't be real, could it? As her hand touched his, a surge of power rushed through her, unlike anything she had ever felt before. It was as if the very earth beneath her feet had shifted, and in that moment, she knew her life had just changed forever. The king's words rang in her ears. You are mine, and nothing will ever separate us. The room was still in shock, but Kaelen's words had sealed her fate. From that moment on, she was no longer the rejected Omega. She was his. And as they left the hall together, Alice couldn't help but wonder, what kind of world awaited her by his side? Would she be the woman who finally broke the chains of her past? Or was she simply another pawn in the game of power and fate? The only thing she knew for sure was that her life was about to take a turn she had never expected. The Alpha King had claimed her, and now, there was no going back. As Alice walked beside the Alpha King, she could hardly believe what had just happened. Her mind raced, unable to grasp the reality of the situation. Just moments ago, she had been nothing, an invisible Omega in a world of alphas and betas, ignored and rejected. Now, she was walking alongside the most powerful man in the land, the Alpha King, Kaelen. His presence was overwhelming, his aura so commanding that it seemed to make the very air around her tense with power. They walked in silence, but Alice could feel his gaze on her, sharp and intense, as if he were studying her every movement. She couldn't bring herself to look at him, not yet. After all, she was still trying to make sense of everything that had happened. How could this be real? Why had he chosen her, of all people? She had never been anyone special, never been the kind of Omega that others sought after. Her lack of a wolf form, her inability to shift, had always marked her as weak and unworthy. And yet here she was, with Kaelen at her side, heading to a future she could never have imagined. "Why me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Kaelen's pace didn't falter, but his response was quiet and direct. "Because you are mine, Alice. And I don't choose out of pity. I choose out of fate." His words sent a shiver down her spine, but they also made something stir inside her, a strange warmth that she hadn't expected. Her heart began to race. Was this really fate? The idea seemed impossible, yet the way he said it, with such certainty, made it feel as though there was no other explanation. The night air was cool, and the distant sound of the pack's howls echoed in the distance as they approached the royal palace. As they neared the entrance, the heavy doors swung open, revealing the grand hallway inside. Alice couldn't help but feel small in the midst of such opulence. The palace was a place of power, a place where her very presence felt like an intrusion. But Kaelen's hand, firm on her back, kept her moving forward. She couldn't deny that she was terrified. As they stepped into the grand hall, a hush fell over the room. Servants and guards alike stopped what they were doing and turned their eyes toward them. Alice's heart raced, and she felt a wave of embarrassment wash over her. She had never been the center of attention. She had always been the one on the sidelines, the one who blended into the background. But now, with Kaelen by her side, all eyes were on her. The Alpha King's presence filled the room, but there was something different now, something that made her stand taller, made her feel as though she belonged here. "This is your place now," Kaelen said softly, his voice just for her. He guided her toward a grand seat beside his own at the head of the room, and as she sat, she couldn't help but notice the way the others in the room watched her. They were all waiting for something. Alice had never been one to care about the opinions of others, but in this moment, she felt it, this strange, undeniable pull toward Kaelen and his world. The weight of his gaze settled on her, but instead of feeling suffocated, she felt empowered, as though for the first time in her life, she had found her place. The Alpha King's gaze never wavered as he stood before the gathering, his voice booming across the hall. "This is Alice, my mate," he declared, his words carrying a finality that left no room for doubt. "She is the one I have chosen, and anyone who dares to challenge that will answer to me." The room went silent, the tension thick in the air. Alice's breath caught in her throat. The Alpha King had claimed her, and with those words, she understood that her life would never be the same. She had been rejected, cast aside by her own pack, but now, she was the Alpha King's mate. And as she looked around the room, she saw the mix of admiration and envy in the eyes of the others. They had all seen her as nothing, a weak Omega. But now, they would have to see her as something else, the mate of the most powerful Alpha in the land. She couldn't help but feel a sense of pride welling up inside her. This was her moment. This was her chance to prove herself, to show the world that she was more than the sum of their expectations. She was Alice, and she was the Alpha King's mate. Alice sat beside Kaelen, her heart still racing from the events that had unfolded. The grand hall was filled with the sounds of distant conversations, but in her mind, everything was still. She could hardly believe what had just happened. Just hours ago, she had been nothing but a discarded Omega, and now she was sitting next to the Alpha King, his mate, with everyone in the room watching her. The weight of their eyes on her was overwhelming, but it was nothing compared to the weight of Kaelen's gaze. He watched her with a quiet intensity, his silver eyes never straying from her face. It was as if he could see straight into her soul, and for the first time, she didn't feel ashamed. She didn't feel like a burden. For the first time, she felt like she belonged. "Are you all right?" Kaelen asked, his voice low, but it carried across the silence between them. His hand reached out, brushing against hers, a simple touch that sent a wave of warmth through her. Alice nodded, though her throat felt tight. "I'm fine," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. The truth was, she wasn't fine. She was overwhelmed, confused, and terrified. Everything had happened so fast. She had never imagined that the Alpha King would choose her, let alone claim her in front of the entire pack. "You don't need to be afraid," Kaelen said, as though he could read her thoughts. "I've chosen you, Alice, and I'll protect you." The words, though reassuring, did little to calm the storm inside her. She wanted to believe him, truly, but the world she had known had always been filled with rejection. The people she had trusted had abandoned her, and now, here was Kaelen, making promises that felt too good to be true. But then, she looked at him. She saw the sincerity in his eyes, the way his gaze softened when it met hers. He wasn't just saying words. He meant it. And somehow, that made all the difference. As the night wore on, Kaelen introduced Alice to the members of his court, each one bowing their heads in respect to her as the new Luna. At first, it felt like a dream. She could hardly believe the power she was now privy to, the authority that came with being by Kaelen's side. The life she had once known, where she was dismissed and ignored, felt like a distant memory. Now, she was part of something far greater, something that she had never thought she would belong to. But with that power came the weight of responsibility. As the evening passed, the guests slowly began to leave, and Alice found herself standing alone in the grand hall with Kaelen. The silence between them felt comfortable now, though there was still a tension in the air that neither of them addressed. "You're not like the others," Alice said suddenly, breaking the silence. Kaelen looked at her, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "I've been told that before," he replied, his voice playful, but there was a depth to it that Alice could sense. "But you're different," she continued, her voice soft. "You didn't reject me like everyone else. You saw something in me." Kaelen's smile faded slightly, and for a moment, he didn't speak. He simply looked at her, his expression unreadable. "I didn't see something in you, Alice," he said after a pause. "I saw you, the real you. Not the weakness others saw, but the strength inside of you. You've always had it." His words hit her harder than she expected. It was as though something deep inside her cracked open, and she felt a rush of emotions she had never allowed herself to feel. Hope, belonging, and for the first time in a long while, love. She had spent so long hiding the parts of herself she thought were unworthy. But Kaelen had seen past all of that. He had seen her, and he had chosen her. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Kaelen reached out, his fingers gently brushing against her cheek. The touch was soft, almost reverent. "You don't have to thank me," he murmured. "I chose you because you are mine, Alice, and I will never let you go." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that made her heart swell. It was a promise she had never expected to hear from anyone. As the night continued, Alice realized that her life had changed forever. She was no longer the discarded Omega. She was the Alpha King's mate, his Luna. And with that, came a new beginning, one full of possibilities she had never dared to imagine. As they stood there, the moonlight streaming through the tall windows, Kaelen's hand found hers once more, and for the first time, Alice felt truly at home. As the days passed, Alice's life in the palace began to take on a rhythm, one she had never imagined possible. The grand halls that had once felt so intimidating now felt like home, a place where she belonged. Kaelen, ever the powerful Alpha King, had given her a life she could never have dreamed of, but it was not without its challenges. Each day, she faced the stares of the court, some filled with curiosity, others with envy, as the new Luna. She had been chosen, but she knew there were still those who doubted her place in Kaelen's world. Still, with each passing moment, she grew more confident in her role by his side. It was not just the title of Luna that Kaelen had given her. It was his trust, his respect, and, above all, his love. Alice could see it in the way he looked at her, the way his presence seemed to calm her fears, and the way he made her feel safe in a world that had once rejected her. "You're not alone anymore," Kaelen had told her one night as they walked the palace gardens under the stars. His words were soft, but they carried the weight of a promise. Alice had never known a love like this, one that didn't come with conditions or expectations. He had chosen her, not because she was the strongest or the most powerful, but because she was hers, and he had seen something in her that no one else had. She was still learning what it meant to be his Luna, but every moment she spent with him felt like a step toward a future she could never have imagined. One evening, as the sun set over the horizon, casting a golden glow over the palace, Kaelen pulled her close, his hand resting on her waist. The warmth of his touch sent a shiver down her spine, but it was not fear. It was something new, something beautiful. "Do you know why I chose you, Alice?" he asked, his voice low and steady. Alice turned to face him, her heart racing. "Because I was the one you saw?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Kaelen smiled, his silver eyes gleaming in the fading light. "No," he said softly. "I chose you because you have a strength that others could never understand. You've endured pain, rejection, and yet you've never let it define you. You are stronger than you know, Alice." His words struck deep within her, stirring something inside her that had been dormant for so long. The self-doubt that had once plagued her began to fade, replaced by a quiet confidence she had never felt before. She had never seen herself as strong, but Kaelen saw something in her that even she couldn't recognize. "You're the one who's taught me how to be strong," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. Kaelen's expression softened, and for a moment, the fierce Alpha King was gone, replaced by a man who cared deeply for the woman beside him. "No, Alice," he said gently. "You've always had that strength. I've just given you the space to find it." As the night deepened, Alice realized that the life she had once feared was now the life she was beginning to embrace. She was no longer the discarded Omega, no longer the one who had been overlooked. She was Alice, the Luna of the most powerful Alpha in the land, and with that came not only power but also responsibility. There would be challenges ahead. The court would not always be kind, and there were those who would question her place by Kaelen's side. But for the first time in her life, Alice felt ready to face whatever came her way. She had found a place where she belonged, a place where she was loved and respected. And with Kaelen by her side, she knew that together, they could face anything. The journey ahead would not be easy, but it would be hers, and that was enough. As the days turned into weeks, Alice's confidence grew, and with it, her connection to Kaelen deepened. They faced the challenges of their world together, with Alice standing by his side as his equal, his mate, and his Luna. And in the quiet moments, when it was just the two of them, she could feel the strength of their bond, a bond that would last for a lifetime. As Alice settled into her new life by Kaelen's side, she couldn't help but notice the subtle changes within herself. At first, everything had seemed overwhelming. The weight of being chosen, of suddenly becoming the Luna of a powerful Alpha. But as the weeks passed, the fear began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of purpose. She had never felt this strong, never felt so sure of herself. Kaelen's support was unwavering, and he never once treated her as anything less than his equal, his mate. Together, they began to tackle the challenges of ruling a kingdom, facing both internal and external threats with calm determination. Their bond, forged through adversity, had only grown stronger. Yet, despite all the changes, Alice knew that her path was not without obstacles. The court still whispered behind her back, and not everyone was thrilled with the idea of an Omega ruling beside the Alpha King. She could see it in the eyes of some, the disdain, the disapproval, and the doubt. But Kaelen was always there, a steady force beside her. He had made it clear from the beginning that she was his choice, and he would protect her, no matter what. One evening, as the moonlight bathed the palace in a soft glow, Alice found herself standing on the balcony overlooking the kingdom. The night was quiet, the only sound the distant rustle of leaves in the wind. She could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders, but for the first time, it didn't feel unbearable. She had Kaelen, and she had herself. Together, they could face whatever came their way. Kaelen appeared beside her, his presence warm and comforting. Without a word, he stood next to her, his gaze fixed on the horizon. They stood in silence for a while, simply enjoying the peace of the night. Alice could feel the connection between them, the bond that had been growing stronger every day. It was a bond that went beyond words, beyond anything that could be explained. "You're not alone, Alice," Kaelen said quietly, breaking the silence. His voice was steady, but there was an undeniable softness to it. "You never have to face this alone." Alice turned to look at him, her heart swelling with emotion. She had never known such support, such unconditional love. Kaelen had chosen her, not because she was the strongest or the most powerful, but because he saw something in her that no one else did. And that, she realized, was enough. "I know," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "And I won't let you face it alone either." Kaelen smiled, a rare and genuine smile that made his silver eyes shine even brighter. He reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek. And for a moment, everything else faded away. It was just the two of them, standing together in the quiet night, knowing that whatever challenges they faced, they would face them as a team. The days that followed were filled with decisions, some difficult, some simple, but always made with the strength of their bond. Alice was no longer just an Omega. She was the Luna, the Alpha King's mate, and she had a voice in the matters of the kingdom. Kaelen trusted her instincts, valued her opinions, and together, they made decisions that would shape the future of their people. Yet, despite the strides she had made, Alice knew that there were still forces within the kingdom who would never fully accept her. The old ways of thinking were hard to change, and there were those who resented the idea of a rejected Omega standing at Kaelen's side. Alice didn't care. She knew who she was now, and she knew where her place was. As Kaelen's mate, she would fight for what was right, for the kingdom they would build together. One evening, as they sat together in the royal chambers, discussing the future, Kaelen's expression grew serious. He had always been confident, but tonight, there was a tension in his shoulders, a hint of something deeper. "Alice," he said, his voice low, "there are still those who doubt your place here. They will never fully accept you, no matter what we do." Alice's heart sank. She had known this day would come, but hearing it from Kaelen made it feel more real, more inevitable. "I don't care about their doubts," she replied, her voice steady. "I care about us, about what we can build together. I care about the people who trust us, who believe in us." Kaelen's gaze softened, and he reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "That's why I chose you," he said, his voice filled with conviction. "Because you understand what it means to lead, to fight for what's right, and to never give up, no matter what others think." Alice smiled, her heart swelling with pride. She had found her place beside Kaelen, and nothing, not the doubts of others nor the challenges ahead, would change that. Together, they would face whatever came their way, and they would do it as a team. She was no longer just the rejected Omega. She was the Luna, and nothing would ever take that away from her. As the weeks turned into months, Alice continued to grow into her new role as the Luna, standing proudly by Kaelen's side. The challenges they faced were not easy, and there were still whispers in the court, but with every passing day, she proved herself to be more than just the rejected Omega. She had earned her place, not through power, but through her unwavering loyalty, intelligence, and the quiet strength that Kaelen had seen in her from the very beginning. Together, they worked tirelessly to bring their vision for the kingdom to life, making decisions for the good of the people, facing every trial with determination and unity. Yet, despite their efforts, trouble was brewing on the horizon. There were those who still couldn't accept the idea of Alice as Luna. The old ways ran deep in the kingdom, and some of the nobles refused to acknowledge a woman who had once been cast aside as their queen. Kaelen, however, remained steadfast in his support of Alice, and together, they confronted every challenge that came their way. One afternoon, as they sat together in the royal chambers, Kaelen looked at Alice with a serious expression. "There are rumors spreading," he said, his voice low but steady. "Some of the nobles are not happy with the way things are going. They still doubt your place here." Alice's heart tightened at the mention of the rumors, but she didn't let it show. "Let them doubt," she said firmly. "I have Kaelen's trust, and that is enough for me. I will fight for this kingdom, for us, and for the people who believe in us." Kaelen smiled, his gaze softening as he looked at her. "I know you will," he said, "and that's why I chose you. Because you never give up, no matter what." As the days passed, Alice's resolve only grew stronger. She had already faced so much in her life, and now that she had Kaelen by her side, she knew that together, they could face anything. She was no longer the weak Omega who had been rejected and cast aside. She was the Luna, and nothing could change that. The court may not fully accept her, but she would not let their doubts shake her. One evening, as the full moon rose high in the sky, Kaelen and Alice stood together on the palace balcony, looking out over the kingdom. The night was peaceful, the quiet hum of the palace settling in the background. For a moment, it felt as though the world had stopped moving, and it was just the two of them. "Do you ever wonder how far we've come?" Alice asked, her voice soft as she leaned into Kaelen's side. "From where I was, from who I was, to this moment." Kaelen wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "I don't wonder," he said, his voice steady and sure. "I know how far we've come. and I know where we're going. Alice turned to face him, her heart swelling with love and gratitude. Where are we going? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kaelen's silver eyes met hers, and for a moment, it felt as though the weight of the world had shifted. Together, he said simply. We're going forward, together, and nothing will ever take that away from us. In that moment, Alice realized that she had found not just a mate, but a partner, someone who saw her for who she truly was. She wasn't the Omega who had been rejected. She was the Luna, and Kaelen was by her side, guiding her, supporting her, and loving her. Together, they would face whatever the future held, with no doubt in their hearts and no fear in their souls. As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, Alice knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would overcome them, because they were a team. And nothing could break that bond. The kingdom would see it, the court would see it, and the world would see it. Kaelen and Alice were meant to be together, and nothing would ever change that. The kingdom had begun to settle into a new rhythm, with Kaelen and Alice working together to strengthen their rule. The challenges that had once seemed insurmountable were now smaller in comparison to the bond they had forged. Yet, despite their growing unity, the undercurrent of dissent remained. The whispers of the nobles, the lingering doubts of those who could not accept an Omega as Luna, still echoed in the halls of the palace. Alice, though stronger than before, could not ignore the tension in the air. It was a constant reminder that her place was still being questioned, even if. Kaelen stood by her side. She had come a long way from the discarded Omega she once was, but the road ahead was still filled with obstacles. As the days turned into weeks, the pressure of leadership began to weigh heavily on both of them. They had made strides, but Alice knew there was still work to be done. The kingdom was recovering, but it was fragile. Old alliances had to be solidified, and new ones had to be forged. Kaelen could sense her unrest, and as always, he was there to support her. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Alice found herself in the palace garden, staring out at the moonlit path that led to the distant woods. The air was cool, and the scent of night-blooming flowers filled her senses. It was a rare moment of peace, a moment where she could breathe without the weight of expectations pressing down on her. Kaelen appeared beside her, his presence as commanding as ever, but there was softness in his gaze as he looked at her. "You've been quiet lately," he said, his voice low, but not unkind. Alice glanced at him, feeling the weight of his concern. "I've been thinking," she admitted, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "We've made progress, but there are still those who don't accept me. They see me as an outsider, someone who doesn't belong in this world." Kaelen's eyes softened, and he placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You belong here, Alice. You're my Luna, and nothing, no one, will ever change that." His words were comforting, but Alice couldn't shake the feeling of being an outsider in her own kingdom. The court had accepted her out of necessity, but that didn't mean they saw her as equal. She still felt the cold stares of those who resented her place beside Kaelen. She didn't want to be just the Luna by title. She wanted to earn their respect, to prove that she was more than just a mate to their king. "I know," she replied softly, "but I can't help feeling like I'm just here, not truly part of this world." Kaelen smiled gently, his thumb brushing across her cheek. "You are a part of this world, Alice. You always have been. The people see your strength, even if they don't always show it. And one day, they will realize that. You are just as important as anyone else in this kingdom." Alice looked into his eyes, seeing the unwavering belief he had in her. It was something she had never known before, and it filled her with a sense of purpose she had never felt. She was no longer the discarded Omega. She was the Luna, and with Kaelen by her side, she could prove to the kingdom that she was worthy of that title. The days that followed were filled with decisions that would shape the future of their kingdom. Alice worked alongside Kaelen, using her intelligence and compassion to influence the direction of the kingdom. She was no longer content to sit idly by. She took an active role in the decisions that affected their people, and slowly, the court began to notice. They had seen her as weak, as unworthy, but now, they were beginning to understand that she was strong, capable, and deserving of the respect she had fought so hard to earn. It was a long road, but with each victory, Alice grew more confident in her role as Luna. She had come to realize that her strength wasn't just in her power, it was in her ability to empathize, to listen, and to lead with compassion. And with Kaelen by her side, there was nothing she couldn't do. One day, as they sat together in the royal chambers, Kaelen turned to her, his gaze intense yet filled with pride. "You've done it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've earned the respect of the kingdom, Alice. You're not just my Luna. You are the heart of this kingdom." Alice's heart swelled at his words. She had always wanted to prove herself, to show that she wasn't just a discarded Omega. And now, with Kaelen's unwavering support and her own growing strength, she had finally earned her place. She wasn't just the Alpha King's mate. She was his equal, his partner, and together, they would rule the kingdom, not as two separate entities, but as one united force. The challenges were far from over, but Alice knew, without a doubt, that she was ready. She had found her place in Kaelen's world, and nothing would ever make her feel like she didn't belong. The kingdom was on the edge of change, and as time passed, Alice found herself more deeply entrenched in the world of power and responsibility that she had once only dreamed of. Every day, she worked tirelessly by Kaelen's side, and each day she saw the kingdom shift under their combined influence. It was no longer just about surviving the challenges that came with being the Alpha King's mate. It was about leading with strength and compassion, ensuring that their people thrived. Yet, despite their success, Alice could feel that the world was still testing her. There were still those who doubted her, still those who couldn't accept that an Omega could be a true leader. The palace whispers hadn't ceased, and even now, there were moments when Alice caught the lingering glances of the nobles, their eyes filled with judgment. But this time, she didn't flinch. She had Kaelen, and together, they had proven that strength was not in titles or bloodlines, but in the heart and mind. Alice had earned her place at Kaelen's side, and she was no longer the weak Omega who had been cast aside. She was the Luna, and the time for doubting her was over. Kaelen had always been a force of nature, powerful, commanding, and unwavering. But in Alice, he had found someone who balanced his fierceness with compassion, someone who saw the kingdom not as a kingdom of power, but of people. He had chosen her not for her strength in battle or her ability to wield magic, but for her heart and her ability to lead. As they stood together in the royal garden one evening, the sun setting behind the tall trees, Kaelen turned to her with a quiet expression. "I never thought I would find someone like you, Alice," he said, his voice low but filled with emotion. "When I chose you, I knew it wasn't just fate. It was something deeper. You've shown me what it means to truly lead." Alice met his gaze, her heart swelling with pride. Kaelen had always been her rock, the one person who believed in her when no one else did. But in return, she had given him something that was just as valuable, someone who believed in the people, someone who understood that leadership was not about domination but about unity. "I never thought I would be here," Alice said softly, her hand finding his. "But now that I am, I know I belong here. With you." Kaelen smiled, his grip tightening on her hand as he pulled her closer. "Together, we will build a kingdom that is strong not because of power, but because of compassion and strength," he said, his voice resolute. As the days went by, their bond only deepened, and the kingdom began to see the changes they had dreamed of. The people began to trust Alice, not just because she was the Luna, but because they saw her dedication to their welfare, her passion for justice, and her willingness to listen. They had once feared her because of her past, because of her weakness, but now they revered her for her strength. The nobles who had once sneered at her now found themselves in awe of the woman who stood beside Kaelen, a woman who had earned her place not by blood, but by her heart. But with power came responsibility, and with that responsibility came enemies. Alice knew that there were still those who would do anything to see her fail, who resented her for what she had become. And as the threat of war loomed closer, Alice and Kaelen knew they would need to fight harder than ever before to protect their people and their kingdom. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Kaelen pulled Alice aside into a quiet corner of the palace. "There are whispers," he said, his tone serious. "Some of the kingdoms around us are restless. They see our strength, and they fear it." Alice's heart skipped a beat. "What do they want?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear that threatened to rise within her. Kaelen's eyes darkened with resolve. "They want to break us. They want to take what we've built and tear it down." Alice stood tall, her hand finding his once more. "Then we'll fight," she said, her voice fierce. "Together. We won't let anyone take what's ours. Kaelen's gaze softened, and for a moment, the weight of the world seemed to lift between them. He smiled, a rare and genuine smile that made his silver eyes shine with warmth. Together, he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. As the night wore on, Alice knew that the coming battle would not be easy. But she was ready to fight for her kingdom, for Kaelen, and for the future they had worked so hard to build. They had already proven that nothing could break them, not the doubts of the court, not the rumors of their enemies, and not the challenges they faced. Together, they were unstoppable, and nothing could change that. With Kaelen by her side, Alice knew she could face whatever the future held, and she would do it with courage, strength, and love. The days leading up to the battle were filled with tension. Alice stood by Kaelen's side, watching as the kingdom prepared for what was sure to be a defining moment. The threat from the neighboring kingdoms had grown more pressing, and every decision they made was crucial. It wasn't just their lives on the line anymore. It was the future of the kingdom they had fought so hard to build. Despite the looming danger, Alice felt more prepared than she ever had. She was no longer the fragile, overlooked Omega she once was. She was the Luna, the equal of the Alpha King. She had earned her place by Kaelen's side, and now, she would stand beside him in battle, not just as his mate, but as his partner. Kaelen, ever the steadfast leader, had never wavered in his belief in her. He trusted her, valued her opinions, and in turn, she trusted him with everything she had. Together, they were unstoppable. The war drums echoed in the distance, signaling that the time had come. The kingdom's forces gathered, their resolve as unshakable as Kaelen's determination. Alice stood at the front of the army, her eyes fixed on the horizon, her heart filled with the weight of what was to come. But she wasn't afraid. She had Kaelen, and together, they had the strength to face anything. "Stay close," Kaelen said, his voice low but commanding. As he moved toward her, his presence a constant source of reassurance. Alice nodded, feeling the familiar surge of confidence that always came when she was with him. "I will," she replied, her voice steady. As the battle raged on, Alice fought with a fierceness she hadn't known she possessed. She moved with purpose, her instincts guiding her, her heart set on protecting the kingdom and the people she had come to love. The sound of swords clashing, the cries of warriors, and the heavy thuds of battle surrounded her, but she focused only on the task at hand, fighting alongside Kaelen to defend their future. The enemy forces were relentless, but Kaelen's leadership and Alice's determination kept their army strong. They fought with a unity that only came from the deep bond they shared, and as the battle raged on, the tide began to turn in their favor. Alice found herself at the heart of the conflict, facing down the enemy forces with a courage that surprised even herself. She wasn't just fighting for the kingdom, she was fighting for Kaelen, for their future, and for the love they had built together. With every swing of her sword, with every step she took, she felt her connection to Kaelen grow stronger. They were unstoppable, not because of their power alone, but because of the love that fueled them. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the enemy forces began to retreat. Their kingdom had prevailed. Kaelen and Alice stood together, watching as their enemies fled, the battlefield littered with the remnants of the fight. There were losses, there always were in war, but in that moment, Alice felt an overwhelming sense of victory, not just for the kingdom, but for herself. She had fought alongside Kaelen, proving to herself and to everyone around her that she was more than capable of standing by his side, of leading with him. As the dust settled and the cries of victory filled the air, Kaelen turned to Alice, his silver eyes meeting hers. "We did it," he said, his voice filled with awe and pride. Alice smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. "We did it together," she replied, her hand finding his. In that moment, they both knew that this was only the beginning. The battle had been won, but the real victory was in the strength of their bond, the love that had carried them through the darkest times and had led them to this moment. They were no longer just the Alpha King and his Luna. They were partners, equals, and together, they would rule the kingdom with wisdom, compassion, and strength. Alice had found her place, not just beside Kaelen, but within the kingdom they had built together. She had proven to herself and to everyone around her that she was more than capable of being the leader they needed, and Kaelen had always believed in her. As they stood there, hand in hand, watching the sun rise over their kingdom. Alice knew that they were ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. They had faced the worst, and had come out stronger on the other side. And now, with the love and trust they shared, there was nothing they couldn't face. Together, they were unstoppable,